Welcome. If you enjoy relaxing history stories, you can subscribe to hear more. Now, let's begin. Imagine a place shrouded in mist. A place where the mountains rise like dark sentinels, their slopes falling steeply into a deep and mysterious body of water. This is Loch Ness, a vast freshwater lake stretching for nearly 23 miles through the rugged highlands of Scotland. It is beautiful, it is haunting, and it is said to be home to one of the greatest mysteries of all time, the Loch Ness Monster. For nearly a century, countless stories, photographs, and eyewitness accounts have painted a portrait of a creature that defies explanation. Some call it a dinosaur left behind by history. Others insist it's a giant eel, a misidentified seal, or simply a trick of the water and light. Yet the legend persists, stronger than ever, drawing millions of visitors from around the world who peer into the cold, dark waters and ask themselves the same question: what lies beneath? Tonight, we are diving deep into the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster. We'll journey through ancient Celtic folklore, examine the first documented sightings, explore the explosive media frenzy of the 20th century, and consider the modern scientific investigations that continue to this very day. This is not just the story of a monster, it is the story of a myth that became larger than life. Long before the modern idea of Nessie captured headlines, the waters of Loch Ness were already steeped in legend. In Celtic mythology, lakes and rivers were often thought to be gateways to another world, sacred, mysterious, and dangerous. One of the most enduring myths is that of the Kelpie, a shape-shifting water spirit said to haunt Scottish lochs. Kelpies often appeared as beautiful horses standing near the shore, tempting travelers or children to climb onto their backs. But once the victim touched the creature, they would be stuck fast, unable to escape. The Kelpie would then leap into the water, dragging its prey beneath the surface, never to be seen again. Some legends describe the Kelpie as a dark, monstrous being, with glowing eyes and a mane made of dripping weeds. To the people who lived along the loch centuries ago, water was life, but also death. Fishermen disappeared. Boats capsized without explanation. When tragedy struck, it was easy to imagine something powerful and terrifying lurking just below the surface. Loch Ness, with its depth, over 750 feet at its deepest point, and its inky, peat-dark water, was the perfect stage for such fears. And so, long before the name Loch Ness Monster was ever spoken, the idea of something dangerous, something unnatural in the water, was already there. The first written account of a creature in Loch Ness dates back to the 6th century. The story comes from the life of Saint Columba, written by a monk named Adamnan. According to the tale, Columba, an Irish missionary, was traveling in the Scottish Highlands when he encountered a group of locals burying a man near the River Ness. They explained that the men had been attacked by a water beast while swimming. Columba, curious and fearless, ordered one of his followers to swim across the river. As the men entered the water, the beast appeared again, rushing toward him with open jaws. But Columba raised his hand, made the sign of the cross, and commanded the creature to retreat. Miraculously, the monster stopped in its tracks and fled in terror. To believers, this story is proof that something unnatural has been lurking in these waters for over 1,000 years. To skeptics, it's simply a piece of Christian mythology, a tale meant to demonstrate the saint's power and holiness. But whatever the truth, the story remains the earliest written reference to a creature in the waters of Loch Ness. Fast forward to the early 20th century. In 1933, a new road was built along the shores of Loch Ness, making the once remote lake far more accessible to locals and travelers. That same year, the first modern reports of a strange creature began to surface. In April 1933, a local couple named John and Aldi McKay claimed to have seen a massive creature rolling and plunging in the water. The Inverness Courier published the story, describing it as a monster of Loch Ness. This simple headline sparked an international sensation. Soon, journalists, tourists, and monster hunters flocked to the loch, eager to catch a glimpse. Just months later, another report followed. On July 22, 1933, a motorcyclist named George Spicer and his wife described seeing the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen, crossing the road in front of them near the loch. They claimed it had a long neck, a large body, and lumbered awkwardly across the land before disappearing into the water. These stories ignited imaginations across Britain and beyond. Could there truly be a prehistoric creature, perhaps a surviving plesiosaur, hiding in Scotland's most famous lake? The Loch Ness Monster became a global phenomenon. By the mid-1930s, Nessie fever was in full swing. Amateur photographers camped out by the lake day and night, hoping for proof. And in 1934, the most famous photograph of all was taken, the so-called surgeon's photograph. It showed a long, slender neck rising from the water, with a small head at the top, exactly what people imagined the Loch Ness Monster would look like. Published in the Daily Mail, the photo was hailed as undeniable evidence. For decades, it was the iconic image of Nessie, reprinted in countless newspapers, books, and documentaries. But decades later, in the 1990s, the photo was revealed to be a hoax. One of the men involved admitted it was nothing more than a toy submarine with a fake head attached. Still, by then, the damage, or perhaps the magic, was already done. The image had burned itself into the public consciousness. Even knowing it was fake did little to shake the legend. And so, by the mid-20th century, Loch Ness was transformed from a quiet highland lake into the stage for one of the greatest mysteries in modern folklore. From ancient Celtic myths of water spirits, to the testimony of saints, to 20th century headlines and photographs, the Loch Ness Monster had taken shape, not just in the water, but in the imagination of millions. But the story doesn't end there. Because in the decades that followed, new sightings, daring expeditions, and even sonar scans of the loch would only deepen the mystery. Scientists, journalists, and adventurers would dedicate their lives to solving the riddle. And yet, the deeper they searched, the more questions seemed to rise from the dark waters of Loch Ness. What lies beneath? A monster? A myth? Or something stranger still? The legend of the Loch Ness Monster had already captured the public imagination by the 1930s. But what came next was a wave of obsession unlike anything Scotland had ever seen. For the next half-century, Loch Ness became a theater of mystery, where science, media, and folklore collided. This was no longer just a story whispered in Highland villages. It was a global phenomenon, and people were determined to prove that Nessie was real. After World War II, advances in technology made it easier than ever for people to record their experiences. Cameras became more common, film was more affordable, and the hunger for mystery grew in a world still recovering from conflict. By the 1950s, Loch Ness was flooded with tourists, journalists, and self-styled monster hunters. Eyewitness accounts multiplied. People reported seeing humps rising from the water, long serpentine necks gliding through the mist, and massive shapes disturbing the calm surface of the loch. Each story added fuel to the fire. In 1951, perhaps the most famous post-war photograph was taken by Lachlan Stewart, a forestry worker. He captured 3 dark humps rising from the loch. To many, it looked like undeniable proof. But skeptics later suggested the humps were nothing more than hay bales floating in the water. The photograph remains controversial to this day. The 1960s marked a turning point. If there was truly a monster in Loch Ness, then modern technology could find it. The loch, after all, is vast, nearly 23 miles long and over 750 feet deep, but surely not big enough to hide from sonar, cameras, and scientific instruments. In 1960, Tim Dinsdale, an aeronautical engineer, filmed what would become one of the most famous pieces of evidence in Nessie lore. From the opposite shore, he captured footage of a large object moving across the water, creating a distinct wake. Dinsdale was convinced he had filmed a living creature, not a boat. His footage was later analyzed by experts, some of whom argued that it showed a solid, moving object beneath the surface. To believers, it was one of the most compelling pieces of evidence ever recorded. The film electrified the public. Suddenly, Loch Ness was not just a place of myth, it was a place of science and discovery. Expeditions soon followed. In 1962, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, LNIB, was founded. Based in a caravan near the loch, this group of enthusiasts, scientists, and volunteers dedicated themselves to watching the waters day and night. They used binoculars, cameras, and, eventually, sonar equipment. For over a decade, they documented hundreds of reports. The LNIB captured numerous photographs, some showing mysterious shapes or humps. One image from 1960, taken by Peter O'Connor, shows a long, serpent-like figure emerging from the loch. Another, taken in 1972, depicts what looks like a head and long neck rising from the water. Each photograph sparked headlines, debates, and skepticism. Though the Bureau disbanded in the mid-1970s, it left behind a legacy of evidence, fragmented, inconsistent, but endlessly fascinating. The 1970s saw the most ambitious scientific efforts to uncover the mystery. In 1972, a group called the Academy of Applied Science, led by Dr. Robert Rines, conducted sonar sweeps of the loch. They claimed to have detected large, moving objects deep underwater. Even more sensational were the underwater photographs they released, blurry but suggestive images of what looked like a flipper, a body, and possibly even the head of a creature. The flipper photo, in particular, caused a worldwide sensation. Published in Nature and other outlets, it was hailed as the first true proof of Nessie's existence. Scientists debated whether it resembled the flipper of a plesiosaur, the marine reptile thought to have gone extinct 65 million years ago. For believers, this was it, the smoking gun. For skeptics, the photos were too blurry, too indistinct, open to interpretation. Some argued they were simply images of logs, debris, or tricks of light underwater. Years later, even the researchers themselves admitted that the photographs had been digitally enhanced, casting further doubt. Yet, even with controversy, the images reignited Nessie mania. Books were written. Documentaries aired worldwide. Loch Ness tourism skyrocketed. By the late 20th century, the Loch Ness Monster was no longer just a Scottish legend, it was a global icon. Nessie appeared in films, cartoons, and advertisements. Tourists flocked to the Highlands, hoping to catch a glimpse or take a photograph. Local businesses thrived on the monster's fame, with hotels, souvenir shops, and boat tours cashing in. And yet, beneath the surface of media spectacle, the scientific search continued. In 1987, one of the most ambitious projects ever attempted on Loch Ness took place, Operation Deep Scan. Using a fleet of boats equipped with powerful sonar, researchers swept the entire length of the loch. The results? They detected several large, unexplained moving objects. Not definitive proof of a monster, but enough to keep the mystery alive. The sonar images suggested shapes larger than known fish, though skeptics argued they could have been schools of salmon, debris, or echoes caused by the loch's unusual underwater geography. Throughout these decades, skeptics and scientists repeatedly challenged the evidence. They argued that many sightings could be explained by waves, drifting logs, otters, or swimming deer. The unusual conditions of Loch Ness also played tricks on the eyes. Its dark, peaty water reduces visibility, and its long, narrow shape creates optical illusions. A boat wake seen from a distance could easily appear to be a moving hump. And then there were the hoaxes. In addition to the famous surgeon's photograph being revealed as fake, other alleged photos and films were exposed as deliberate fabrications. Each hoax chipped away at the credibility of the monster. But paradoxically, it also fueled the legend. Because even if some images were fake, what about the rest? By the end of the 20th century, the Loch Ness Monster was both everywhere and nowhere. Nessie was a celebrity, a tourist attraction, a pop culture icon. Scientific expeditions had swept the loch with sonar, underwater cameras, and endless patience, but the definitive proof always seemed just out of reach. It is as if Loch Ness itself resists the truth. A place of shadows, of deep waters and ancient legends, it gives just enough to tantalize, but never enough to satisfy. And so, the question lingered, was Nessie a living creature, hiding in the depths? A giant eel, a prehistoric survivor, or something supernatural? Or was it all a grand illusion, a story that we, as humans, wanted so badly to believe that we kept it alive with our imagination? The 21st century would bring new technology, new theories, and shocking revelations. But the mystery would remain. As the world entered the 21st century, the mystery of Loch Ness was no longer just a local legend or a tabloid curiosity. It had become one of the most famous unsolved enigmas on Earth. And now, armed with new technology, high-resolution sonar, satellite imaging, underwater drones, and even environmental DNA analysis, scientists and explorers were more determined than ever to uncover the truth of what lay beneath those dark waters. In the early 2000s, several sonar surveys once again attempted to scan the entire loch. The equipment was far more sophisticated than what Operation Deep Scan had used back in the 1980s. Yet, just as before, the results were ambiguous. Large moving shapes occasionally appeared on the sonar, hinting at something unexplained. But the images never gave a clear outline, never produced the irrefutable proof that the world demanded. Each new scan seemed to confirm two things at once, that Loch Ness held secrets, and that it was still unwilling to reveal them. Meanwhile, eyewitness accounts did not disappear. tourists continued to report strange sightings, humps in the water, or massive ripples with no visible source. In 2007, a Scottish laboratory technician named Gordon Holmes filmed what he described as a long, jet-black shape moving swiftly across the surface of the loch. The footage was analyzed by experts and broadcast by the BBC, with some describing it as the most convincing video in decades. Yet others dismissed it as nothing more than an otter, a seal, or even just a boat wake distorted by distance. As always, the footage tantalized but did not convince. Then came one of the most extraordinary scientific approaches ever applied to the mystery: environmental DNA analysis. In 2018, a team of researchers from New Zealand, led by Professor Neil Gemmell, collected hundreds of water samples from different parts of Loch Ness. Using cutting-edge techniques, they extracted traces of DNA shed into the water by every living organism, fish, plants, microorganisms, and more. The idea was simple: if a large unknown creature lived in the loch, its DNA should be present in the water. When the results were published in 2019, the findings made headlines around the world. The researchers found no evidence of any prehistoric reptile, no DNA that could be linked to a plesiosaur or other giant reptilian creature. That seemed to rule out one of the most popular theories of Nessie as a living fossil. But the study did uncover something unexpected: a surprisingly high amount of eel DNA. This led to a new theory: what if Nessie was not a prehistoric monster, but a giant eel? European eels are known to inhabit Loch Ness. They begin life in the Sargasso Sea, thousands of miles away, and migrate to European rivers and lakes, sometimes living for decades before returning to the ocean. Some scientists suggested that unusually large eels might exist in Loch Ness, and that their movements could account for many of the sightings. While no one has ever caught an eel of monstrous proportions there, the possibility added a fascinating layer to the puzzle. But not everyone was satisfied with the eel hypothesis. To believers, the DNA study was inconclusive, leaving open the chance that Nessie was something more mysterious still. After all, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The loch is vast, deep, and filled with silt and peat that complicates scientific measurements. Could a creature still lurk in those depths, unseen by DNA tests and sonar alike? Theories in the 21st century multiplied, reflecting both science and imagination. Some researchers argued that many sightings were likely caused by waves known as seiches, a type of standing wave that occurs in large, enclosed bodies of water. These natural movements can create the illusion of a massive object rising or gliding beneath the surface. Others pointed to floating debris, logs washed into the loch from rivers, or mats of vegetation that can drift and bob, appearing alive from a distance. Still others believed that seals or large fish occasionally found their way into the loch, only to be mistaken for something extraordinary. And then, there are the psychological explanations. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. When people arrive at Loch Ness, primed by decades of stories, photographs, and films, they are predisposed to interpret what they see as the monster. A ripple becomes a hump, a shadow becomes a neck. In this way, Nessie exists not only in the loch, but also in the human mind. Yet even as rational explanations multiply, the allure of the mystery only grows. Nessie has become far more than a cryptid. It is a cultural icon, woven into the identity of Scotland itself. The town of Drumnadriaid, near the western shore of Loch Ness, thrives on tourism tied to the legend. Visitors can explore the Loch Ness Center and exhibition, take boat tours equipped with sonar in hopes of spotting something unusual, or simply stand by the shore, eyes fixed on the waves, hearts filled with wonder. The legend has also found a permanent place in popular culture. From children's cartoons to Hollywood films, from jokes on late-night television to serious documentaries, the Loch Ness Monster is instantly recognizable around the globe. It is marketed on mugs, t-shirts, stuffed animals, and whiskey bottles. It has inspired literature, music, and countless works of art. In this sense, Nessie is one of the most successful creatures ever created, not because of its biology, but because of its story. And stories, after all, are often more powerful than facts. In the digital age, the Loch Ness Monster has found new life online. Social media posts of ripples and waves spark debates across the world in minutes. Webcams installed around the loch allow people from Tokyo to New York to keep watch, hoping to spot something extraordinary. In fact, some of the most recent sightings have come from people monitoring these live feeds, ordinary viewers who swear they've seen shapes or movements that defy explanation. Of course, skepticism remains strong. Many scientists regard the Loch Ness Monster as a fascinating case study in folklore, psychology, and tourism rather than zoology. To them, Nessie is a mirror reflecting our desire for wonder, for the possibility that the world still holds mysteries just out of reach. And yet, the mystery persists. Every time a new expedition sets out, every time a tourist reports something strange, every time an old photograph resurfaces, the legend breathes again. Because Loch Ness itself conspires to keep the secret alive. Its waters are dark, stained by peat, reducing visibility to almost nothing just a few meters below the surface. Its depth rivals that of the North Sea, with trenches and caverns still unmapped. It is a place that resists clarity, a place where imagination can roam free. So what is Nessie? A giant eel, a sturgeon, a seal, a drifting log. A trick of light. A cultural illusion. Or something ancient, something that has survived against all odds, waiting in the shadows of the deep. What makes the mystery so enduring is not just the possibility of an answer, it is the refusal of the loch to give one. For nearly a century of modern searching, Nessie has remained just beyond proof, just beyond reach, a phantom at the edge of vision. And perhaps that is why the world still cares. Because in an age when satellites can map every corner of the Earth, when science has catalogued millions of species and probed the depths of the oceans, Loch Ness remains a reminder that not everything has been explained. That maybe, just maybe, there are still monsters waiting for us. And as long as people stand on its shores, staring into the mist, the legend of the Loch Ness Monster will never die. Why do we believe in monsters? Why, in a world dominated by satellites, drones, and data, do millions of people still cling to the hope that a creature might lurk in the dark waters of a Scottish lake? The Loch Ness Monster is not just about the possibility of an animal. It is about the human mind itself. Throughout history, humanity has always told stories of things beyond the edge of the map. From sea serpents in the age of exploration to dragons in medieval Europe, to Bigfoot in North America, our imagination has been populated with beings that challenge what we know. In psychology, monsters often represent the unknown, the hidden forces of nature that lie beyond our control. They embody fear, but also wonder. In ancient times, when humans stood on the shores of vast oceans or looked up at endless night skies, the unknown was terrifying. And yet, it also called to us. Monsters gave shape to that mystery. They were the shadows into which we could pour our awe, our dread, and our curiosity. Loch Ness itself amplifies this perfectly. The loch is deep, dark, and seemingly endless. Unlike a clear blue lake where you can see to the bottom, Loch Ness swallows light. Stare into it, and it stares back with nothing but blackness. For people standing on its shores, the mind naturally begins to fill in the void. If you cannot see what's down there, then anything could be. And in that space, Nessie was born. Some anthropologists argue that the legend of Nessie is a modern continuation of much older archetypes, the Kelpie, the water dragon, the serpent. Cultures around the world have similar stories, creatures that live at the boundary between water and land, guardians of hidden depths. In Japan, there are tales of the Kappa. In Scandinavian lore, the sea serpent Jormungandr coils in the ocean. In North America, the indigenous peoples of Canada spoke of Agapogo, a lake monster said to dwell in Okanagan Lake. Nessie is not unique. Nessie is one more chapter in a story humanity has been telling for thousands of years, that the waters hold secrets. But what makes Nessie so powerful, so enduring, is not just fear, it is hope. Hope that our world is still bigger than we think. Hope that not everything has been catalogued, measured, dissected. Hope that magic might still exist. Psychologists often point out that humans are drawn to the idea of hidden survivors, creatures thought extinct but suddenly rediscovered. The coelacanth, a prehistoric fish, was believed to have died out 65 million years ago, until one was caught alive in 1938 off the coast of South Africa. If the coelacanth could survive unseen for so long, why not a plesiosaur in Loch Ness? And so, Nessie sits at the intersection of science and myth, skepticism and belief. For some, she is proof that the world is wilder than we admit. For others, she is a mirror, reflecting our deepest longings and fears. By the time the 21st century arrived, Nessie was no longer just a monster, she was an empire. The Loch Ness Monster had become one of the most valuable brands in Scotland, generating millions of pounds in tourism every year. Hotels, restaurants, and shops line the roads around the loch, their signs decorated with cartoon versions of the monster. Plush toys with smiling green faces, mugs with long necks rising from the water, even whiskey bottles shaped like Nessie, all of these sell to eager visitors who come from every corner of the globe. Some come as skeptics, others as believers, but all leave with a piece of the legend. Documentaries continue to fuel the fascination. From the BBC to the Discovery Channel to Netflix, filmmakers return again and again to the loch. Each new special promises the truth, the final search, the mystery solved. And yet, none deliver a conclusion. Instead, they keep the story alive, feeding the cycle of belief and doubt. Hollywood, too, has embraced Nessie. She has appeared in films ranging from family comedies to horror thrillers. In children's cartoons, Nessie is often portrayed as friendly and misunderstood, a gentle giant living in peace. In darker tales, she becomes a predator, a lurking danger beneath the waves. The monster has been endlessly reshaped to fit whatever story people want to tell. And then there are the memes. In the internet age, Nessie has become a creature of humor as much as mystery. From viral jokes about the long-necked Scottish dinosaur, to photoshopped images of the monster swimming in someone's backyard pool, Nessie thrives online. The joke does not weaken the legend, it strengthens it, because even in laughter, people are still talking about her. But beyond merchandise and media, Nessie has become something deeper, a symbol of Scotland. For many visitors, the monster embodies the spirit of the Highlands, wild, mysterious, untamed. Just as the bagpipes and tartan carry cultural weight, so does the silhouette of a long neck rising from dark water. It is a national icon, one that connects modern Scotland to its ancient myths. Some critics argue that the commercialization cheapens the legend. But others see it differently, as proof of Nessie's immortality. Because while animals die, and even species go extinct, symbols live forever. And so, after nearly 2 hours of exploring myths, sightings, hoaxes, science, psychology, and culture, we return to the shore of Loch Ness. The mist drifts low across the water. The surface is calm, dark, unreadable. Somewhere beneath those waves lies the truth. Or perhaps, the truth lies not in the water, but in us. The Loch Ness Monster endures because she belongs to the collective imagination. Every tourist with a camera, every child with a storybook, every scientist scanning the depths, each of them adds a thread to the tapestry. And that tapestry is richer, more powerful, than any single discovery could ever be. If tomorrow, proof emerged that Nessie was nothing more than waves and myths, would people stop coming to Loch Ness? Would the legend vanish overnight? Of course not. Because by now, Nessie is not dependent on bones or DNA. She is a story, and stories are stronger than facts. Perhaps that is the real monster in the loch, the monster of wonder. The reminder that, even in a world mapped by satellites and explained by science, there are still places that feel untouchable. Places where we can stand on the shore, stare into the blackness, and feel small. Places where mystery still breathes. Maybe there is no creature in Loch Ness. Or maybe, just maybe, there is. Either way, Nessie will always be alive, alive in our culture, in our dreams, in our need to believe that something extraordinary lies just beyond the edge of certainty. And so, the legend continues. The waters ripple. The mist rolls. And people keep watching, waiting, hoping. Because the Loch Ness Monster is not just about what is in the lake. It is about what is in us, the unquenchable desire for mystery. The refusal to accept that everything has been explained. The hunger for something more. And until the day the loch is drained, or the truth is revealed beyond doubt, Nessie will remain. A shadow in the water. A story in the mist. A reminder that the world still has secrets. And now, as the waters of Loch Ness grow still in the night, let your thoughts drift like the mist that rolls across the highlands. The mystery remains, but for tonight, it is enough simply to wonder. Close your eyes and imagine the calm surface of the loch, the quiet of the Scottish hills, the stars reflecting in the water. Whether the monster is real or just a dream, the peace of this place is undeniable. So rest now, and carry with you the comfort of mystery, the reminder that not every question needs an answer, not every shadow needs a name,